as we wait for vaccine approval. There's also a lot of hope for a new relief package to help the millions still struggling during this pandemic. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said that a compromise is within reach, but he stopped short of endorsing the bipartisan plan backed by Democratic leadership and some moderate Republicans. President Trump said today he would support another COVID relief bill, but it's unclear if he's referring to that bipartisan bill or a separate, smaller one from Senator McConnell. So what would be in that bipartisan bill should it move forward? $300 a week in federal unemployment benefits and $160 billion in state and local aid. However, the bill would not include another round of stimulus checks. But time is running out to strike a deal. Lawmakers have given themselves just one more week to sort things out. This, as we learned today, that 712,000 Americans filed for unemployment claims last week. The first time in 2 weeks those numbers have come down, but they're still higher than any pre-pandemic record. Now, as the clock ticks down on President Trump's presidency, it's pardon time. We're going to shift gears to pardons and politics right now. Presidents often issue pardons in the weeks before they leave office. Sources tell ABC News that President Trump is considering handing out pardons to an interesting array of people, including members of his own family and even himself. A self-pardon. Can he do that? Well, joining us now to discuss, Akhil Reed Amar, noted constitutional law professor at Yale University, and Leah Wright-Rigueur, professor of public policy at Harvard University and an ABC News contributor. Welcome to you both. And Professor Amar, if I could start with you. A self-pardon, let me just ask you first. In general, how extensive is the pardon power? Would the president, for example, be legally allowed to pardon members of his family who haven't even been charged with a crime?
Yes, a pardon can, generally speaking, issue any time after a crime has occurred. If you can't issue before a crime has occurred, it can only be for federal crimes, not for state crimes. It doesn't apply in impeachment situations. If someone faces an impeachment trial, the pardon power is unavailing then. But apart from those basic propositions, and we'll talk about self-pardon soon enough, it's a very sweeping power.
Yeah, we're looking at the language right now on the screen. The president shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. That's directly from the Constitution. So, Professor Leah Wright-Rigueur, we know that presidents do this at the end of their terms. What does it say about a president, the kinds of pardons that so far he, all of them him, issues? In this one, we're talking about everybody from Rudy Giuliani to the Tiger King, apparently.
Right. Well, I think that there have been a number of, different ways that presidents have approached presidential pardons at the end of their term. So we see a lot of people who decide that they're going to use this in ways that essentially expend their political capital in kind of ways that are untouchable. So we see, for example, with the Obama administration, that there's essentially a mad rush to pardon a number of people or grant clemency to a number of formerly incarcerated individuals or things of that nature. We see somebody like Gerald Ford, who uses that moment actually at the beginning of his presidential term in order to preemptively pardon Richard Nixon. Not necessarily because it is the ethical thing to do or what the public wants, but because he says he thinks it is necessary for the nation to move on in terms of healing. What we're seeing now, I think, with the Trump administration is different from all of that, even though it can exist within the broad confines of the Constitution, in the sense that we really haven't seen presidents preemptively pardon their friends and their cronies and things like that. We fundamentally tend to think of things like that as undemocratic. We also know that it is not popular in the slightest with the American public, who really want to see essentially some kind of justice in a democratic nation when it comes to crimes that have been committed, even if they haven't been brought to the public's attention yet.
And we should say there's no evidence at this point that these pardons for President Trump's families or allies will follow. But Akhil, let me ask you, legal experts seem to be divided right now on that question of self-pardon. Can he legally pardon himself? Sean Hannity, one of his main allies on Fox News, has suggested he should do so. The president tweeted during the Mueller investigation that he thinks he's got that power. Do you think so?
I don't. This has been my view for 30 years. It was my view when Democrats were president, like Bill Clinton. And the Justice Department historically has said no person can pardon himself. It's a very deep legal principle. It's the simple principle that no person can be a judge in his own case. It goes all the way back to Roman law, to biblical time. I have right here, actually, a book by William Blackstone. This was a book that every founder knew about. It sold almost as many copies as the Bible in Revolution-era America. And what Blackstone says, very famously, is it's a first principle of law that no one can be a judge in his own case. If you say, well, where does it say so explicitly in the text of the Constitution? I would say the Constitution is law. It describes itself as law, the supreme law of the land. Law means the rule of law, and this has been what the rule of law has meant for 2,000 years.
If somehow he goes ahead and does it anyway, I guess maybe a charge could be brought in federal court, and that principle would be tested in federal court. And then you did mention, and as the Constitution does, the pardon power extends to offenses against the United States, federal crimes. So state law crimes would still be available for prosecution if there were any?
Correct. And you're also correct that any pardon that issued could be tested in court. If there were a prosecution, a person who's received a pardon would plead the pardon as their defense. Same way, for example, if they'd already been acquitted of the crime, they would plead double jeopardy. And a court would have to decide whether that pardon was valid. Ordinarily, pardons are almost sacrosanct, but suppose, for example, it could be proved that a pardon was procured in a bribe. Well, a court might set aside that pardon. And by the way, given that bribery is a crime, in fact, and it's an impeachable offense, the Constitution itself talks about treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So if you issued a pardon in order to get money, well, that would be a crime. The person paying the money would be the briber. That's a crime. The person receiving it for the pardon, that would be the bribee. That would be a crime. If a pardon issued corruptly, and a court could test all of that. Now, if you're pardoning yourself, it's kind of like bribing yourself. You're the pardonee and the pardoner, the grantor and the grantee, but you're giving yourself something of value, and that in itself is a corrupt act. It's arguably a second offense. And you say, oh, well, I'm going to pardon myself for that. Oh, but then that second pardon is itself a corrupt offense, and on and on.
It is, it's questionable. And I'd like to go to Leah Wright-Rigueur on that. What does this say? This is yet another norm-busting moment that President Trump is clearly considering. He's done so many. What does it say about where we are as a people? We focus on President Trump all the time. He is the norm-buster, has been. But what does it say about the state of our politics and democracy?
So I think one of the things to keep in mind here is that our democracy has been tested at times, and democracy is something that is constantly being remade and something that is essentially constantly a work in progress. But what this teaches us is that these kind of lofty ideals that we have about what our democracy means are far more fragile than we realize. And that what essentially has been propping things up has been this idea of norms and guardrails. But now that the guardrails are down, there's so many things that are possible, right? We know that norm erosion is one central thing that has happened in the last really 4 or 5 years. And so what we should be looking to and what we should be thinking about is the way in which these kind of non-traditional ways that people prop up democracy have actually taken the place of kind of legal ideas. And instead, we're kind of reliant on this really fragile concept of norms in order to establish democracy. And that's really alarming. And I think part of what we should also consider, too, is that we've never been tested in this way because we've never had a president that has been so kind of invested in this idea of norm busting or norm breaking, or essentially kind of tossing the ideas and the guardrails of democracy out. So now what we're learning is that the things that stand in between us and actually keeping our democracy are things like Congress and things like the Supreme Court and things like kind of lawyers and kind of legal systems around that, and that they're far more fragile than we ever could have realized.
It feels that way. Leah Wright-Rigueur and Akhil Reed-Amar, thanks very much for that illuminating discussion on a deep issue, as you say. Thanks.
Thank you both.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.